So yeah, this one is an easy introduction for me. I worked with Dennis for 8, 9 years, I think.
Something like that.
Yeah, Dennis is a dinosaur of the industry. He is one of the guys that worked on the very first OSPP backend even. So he has been here forever. And yeah, we've done at iHomer a project on open source. Is he going to tell a bit about on the learnings that we had way back when this was the first try to do something open source?
Yep.
Floor is yours, Dennis.
Thank you. So I thought I was lucky because I didn't have the spot just before lunch, but apparently I do, so apologies everyone, I won't try to hold you up too long. So as Robert said, right, we built this open source charge point management system in 2014. And like open source in EV wasn't like a common thing yet. I mean, we've heard about Steve today a couple of times. I think Steve was around at that time somewhat, but it wasn't a very common thing, at least not like the bigger projects as you see them today, right? And I learned a lot from that experience, and I'd like to share some stuff. So first, a quick introduction. So Dennis Laumen, live in the Netherlands, said I like traveling, hiking, weird obscure board games, nice food, and this is my son Dan. He's not a criminal, by the way, but he does like Roblox. And let's see. So quick recap like of my professional career. Like as Robert said, right, I built the first OSPP CPMS. Fun thing back then is that you already saw the split between CPOs and MSPs, right? We had two subsystems, basically tackling those two parts of the thing. Built that, did a couple of other projects in the meantime. Joined iHomer in 2013, I think around the same time that Robert joined, I think a few months apart. So we both joined in 2013 and started working in EV again. OSPP was opened up by then, right? So it wasn't when we built it here, so it was already called OSPP. So the fact that it would be opened up was a given, but it wasn't opened up yet. So I joined in 2013, started working on new charge point management systems again. Back then, mostly for charge point manufacturers in the early days, but also a couple of the first generation CPOs. And so this is a fun one I found recently. It's an email by Olger at New Motion, and he sent this thing around, which was the very first OSPI version. So I was involved in that pretty early on as well. And it's somewhat relevant to this talk as well, but we'll dive deeper into that. So that was a fun bit of history I recently uncovered again. This is 10 years ago, almost to the date, I think, yeah, November 2013. Became managing partner at iHomer a few years ago. Did that for a couple of years, left them early this year to join my own startup. It's called Inapi. What we try to do at Inapi is we will solve the issues with regards to, as we call it, stakeholder collaboration in the market. So again, when you look at OSPI, right, the connectivity between CPOs, MSPs, third parties in the market, and solve the issues surrounding roaming we have today in the market. So with regards to technical scaling, legal, financial operations, etc. So that's what I'm doing today, but that's not why we're here. So we're here for Motown. So let me quickly check the thing. Yeah. We're here for Motown. So what is Motown, right? So these are a couple of presentations and documents that were written in 2013. So around the same time as the OSPI documents I just showed were written, which is interesting timing. Because when you look at like what Motown is, like what the vision is, it's on the one hand it was an open source charge point management system, right? As we just seen Meave, we talked about Steve, Citrine OS is up this afternoon, so very similar to those. But it was also trying to, as you can see here, like an open source web services layer to connect charge points and applications. And so the whole idea was, again, with regards to like OSPI, right? These ideas were bubbling up at the same time with the same people involved. And the thinking back then was, okay, it would be really cool to have this open source charge point management system, because what we're seeing in the market right now is that a lot of companies, very early on, right, of course this was 2013 when this was written, a lot of companies are investing a lot of money in this space, right, and everybody's basically investing money in the same things, right, so building an OSPP implementation, making sure the OSPP implementation is good, you know, it works, but that's not a competitive edge, right, you won't like be a more successful CPO if you have the best OSPP implementation. I mean, of course, you will need to have a good OSPP implementation, but to a certain extent, it's more of a hygiene factor than an actual competitive advantage, right? At least it should be. And so the thinking was, okay, let's bundle all these resources together within the industry, right? The industry is still pretty young. Let's bundle that all together. We fix the infrastructure layer together. And then everybody can innovate on top of that, right, on the application layer on top of this. But the thinking was a bit more ambitious than that, right? Because the open source web services layer, right, the idea was, okay, we also have a connectivity issue in this space, right? Already back then, you know, still today, I think, to a certain extent. We have a connectivity issue in this space. And so the idea was, okay, let's build this platform. And the thinking back then was, okay, it should fix this infra layer thing, and then people can start building on top of it. But there should also be like this connectivity and this like modular connectivity between all these installations, right? Allowing people to basically share data about their charge points, connect charge points to each other or whatever, right? I think we probably call that roaming today, and solve this connectivity issue in the space at the same time. And it was interesting to see that basically these Motown and OSPI came up around the same time, basically tackling part of the same problems with completely different approaches, where OSPI tackled it on the protocol layer and Motown tried to tackle it at the software layer. So basically what happened was that, you know, as I said, a couple of companies came together, so Alliander, NewMotion, Elad, and iHomer. And we started building this, and that's what I want to talk about today, and some of the stuff we've learned. So again, some lessons learned, right? I'd like to share. Again, like I think this makes sense, right? So these are my lessons learned, right? I wasn't privy to everything back then. I was mostly working on the technical side. Building this, but I learned a lot from that project. It was a super fun time, and I'd like to share some of those lessons with you today. All right, so first lesson from my perspective is like architect for adoption. And this sounds like a bit of a silly thing, but we started out like we had these ambitious ideas, right, of this massive platform with global connectivity and all these nodes connected to each other, but also like solving this infra layer, right? And so we were like, okay, we need this to be scalable, we need this to be extendable, it needs to be modular. It basically needed to be like all the things, right? And so what we did is we built a super fancy CQRS architecture, which we were quite happy with on a technical level, right? Because it was super fast, very scalable, easily extendable. But there was this big problem, right? Is that, and the problem was pretty simple, and we should have known back then that it was a problem. Nobody got it, right? So I was building this thing, and I was like, awesome, this works great, fantastic software, right? And then people joined the team, and it took weeks and weeks and weeks for even like pretty senior people to actually understand what we were doing. And so maybe this was a communication issue, right? But I think to a large extent there was also like the inherent complexity in this architecture, and also the fact that it wasn't a very common approach to build software back then, right? So we were pretty early on with regards to adopting these types of architectures, and so this is a pretty new thing. People didn't know how it worked. And so we even had this issue with the software improvement group, right, who basically took a look at the code and its maintainability, etc. And they gave us 4 stars, which, you know, is pretty all right. But the criticisms they had were all related to stuff that it wasn't applicable in our architecture. So even they didn't get it, right? And so their whole job is basically evaluating code quality, right? So, yeah, we had a massive issue there, and I think this really hinders adoption, right? And I think one of the key components of a successful open source project, of course, is adoption. You want people to use it, you want people to extend it. So I think a big lesson I learned there is, like, maybe not build the fanciest thing you can, right? Which, again, you know, perform great, scale great, very extendable, if people don't get it, right? Cool. Yeah, foster a community. I think this one, you know, makes a lot of sense, right? So, community is, of course, like super important to open source. I'd say it's the most important thing, and we've heard it talked about today a couple of times already. We never successfully did this, right? And so, from the business side of things, you know, I mentioned a couple of names who are involved, right? All great companies, great foundations, great people involved, from engineering to business, right? And on the business side, I think there were a lot of attempts to like foster this community more in a top-down manner, so to speak. I think some good work was done there, but you know, it wasn't like a massive success. And like on a technical level, I don't think we really tried to do this right. We were very much focused on getting this right? Because we were trying to build this thing and you know, make it the best we could, but we weren't focused like on involving yeah, people in the community. And so what you see is that there were a couple of forks, you know, being done here, but you see all of them like 10 years ago, up until apparently 7 months ago, somebody forked this. So it's still people are forking this stuff online. But as you can also see, like these forks were never updated, right? So people basically checked it out, looked at the code, maybe thought, I don't understand what's happening here, right? Again, we didn't optimize for adoption there. Looked at it and we're like, okay, cool, whatever, right? And so I think the most important thing, right, you can put some code out there, but the way more important thing, if you want this to be a success, is actually like foster that community, try and grow that community for a couple of reasons, right? And I think one thing we noticed back then already is that when you see these forks, right, is that there were a couple of forks in here where, like some of the people I know, right, so I was like, you know, he's forking this, cool. But like some of them were like people in China or whatever, right? And as an engineering team, it's like super cool to be like working on something, and then all of a sudden you wake up on Monday morning, check your email, and see that someone from China forked your code, right? It's just a super exciting thing to see that people are actually using it, doing, you know, something with your code, even if it's just looking at it, right? So people, yeah, it's just super energizing, I think, as an engineering team, but also as the companies involved in this. Yeah, we talked about AI earlier, right? So if you, don't know which picture to put on a slide, you ask AI, and they will do it for you. Build something you use. So that's maybe a silly thing, like basically all the lessons I have here are quite silly, straightforward things, right? But I think this is a super important one. So we're building this platform, had massive ambitions for it, and those ambitions hindered us in a way as well, right? Because we wanted to build something for everybody, right? Everybody should be able to use this. Everybody should be able to adapt this to their needs, should be able to tweak it, should be able to run it in the way they want to, should be, right? And so basically what we did is we built something we wanted everybody to be able to use, and the effect is, right, if you try to please everyone, you end up pleasing no one, right? That's the simple fact. And so this was also the thing for us, right? Is we were building something, but we weren't actually using it, right? So we built this, again, really fancy software platform, but nobody involved in the project was actually running their business on this. And so, of course, there were plans to do this in the future, but at that time, nobody was actually using it. Of course, right, the corporate sponsors involved in the project put a lot of money in this. Everybody put a lot of time in this, which is great, right? I mean, really grateful for everybody's involvement in this and everybody's commitment to this. But I think if you're not using the software right, it's really hard to build something that nobody is using, because you're just building something for a theoretical future user. You won't get any feedback. Um, um, and like nobody's really committed to this thing, right? Because I mean, setting aside some budget, some money is great, right? And it's needed, it's necessary. But if nobody's business is dependent on this, right? The question is, will it be a success? I think it won't be. Yeah, open source is a marathon again, right? So we started out really actively in 2013. I think it was my summer vacation building the first prototypes here. And we started out more actively later on. And we did a lot of work. But basically what happened was like there was no real traction, no real community. Again, nobody was really using it. So what happened really quickly is that we worked really hard for a time, and then stuff died off a little bit. And as you can see, right, there's some blips here where people kept working on it. So at iHomer, where I worked when I was doing this, we tried to maintain this for a while, right, because we believed in the project. But iHomer is an agency, so it's I don't know who's worked at an agency before, but it's super hard at an agency to do stuff like this on the side, right? Because the bottom line is just billable hours. You will only start making profit on Friday afternoon is a thing that's said a lot, right? So any time spent on like something like this that doesn't have a direct impact on the bottom line really hurts. So we tried to keep it alive, but we couldn't really. And you see this in the code frequency chart you see here is that it just slowly died off. Which is a shame, of course. And I think this one also, by the way, connects to the previous point, right? Build something you use, because for us it was super hard to keep investing in this because we weren't actively using it, right? If we were actively using it, maybe running client projects on it, like ThoughtWorks previous talk, for example, right? Then it's super easy to maintain it because you will need to maintain it, right? You will need to work on it because if you don't, right? Your projects will fail, your business will fail, whatever, right? So, yeah, go in for the long haul. And I think the last one is like align open source and business. This was something that has been happening more and more in the last couple of years, right? And our hosts today are a great example of this because they perfectly align, right? The open source community and the business attached to this community, right? So an example here, right, is that all the Ever stuff is open. You can download it, contribute to it, whatever. But there's also like a commercially supported version as well. And I think this is great, and it's something you see a lot more nowadays, specifically in a lot in developer tools, for example, with regards to the open core model you see a lot nowadays, where there's this open source thing, a commercial version attached to it, and the great thing is that these two are very much aligned, right? The open source community needs money, or well, money, time. Well, time is money, right? Needs money to keep going. But the company attached to it, right, is really incentivized to make this a success. Because if it is a success, right, they don't have to do everything themselves. But also, it's a great sales opportunity as well, right? I mean, most people will probably be super happy using the open source version. And then some people will start out using the open source version, realize they need something more, maybe they need commercial support, whatever it is, right? And then there's a commercial version available to you. And I think that's something that went wrong with Motown as well, because nobody's, again, business model was aligned with this, right? And that's also some with regards to the build something you use thing, right? Nobody was actively using it, nobody's business was aligned with this, and so it died a slow death. So, 2024. Funny thing. The website is still online. It's not like completely working. There's this editor. I don't know what's happening here, but the website is still online, right? And for all boomers like me, right, I really love the Google Plus logo here. That's really an artifact of the time this was built in. So the website is still online. There's a lot of information there. I'm also wondering who's paying this website, by the way, because somebody's paying for the hosting. So I'm guessing one of these companies is just automatically paying a bill every year. Don't know. but it was quite fun to see this still be online. And this is also, I think, where it went wrong, right? Because what happened is that I know of companies who reached out to me later on and were like, hey, I found this cool project online, and I downloaded it, started working on it, started using it. I sent an email to the website. Nobody was responding. So, I thought you guys weren't working on it anymore. Nobody was doing stuff on GitHub, so I just downloaded the source code, started working on it, running my business on it today, right? So even today, there are companies who are using this software, just maintaining it themselves, use it as a jumping off point, and are, happily using it, which was pretty cool. One of those companies, by the way, is also iHomer. So iHomer has the Infuse EV suite, as it's called, right? And that's a suite of EV products, and some of the products in that suite are based on Motown. Of course, like completely, I mean, it's a 10-year-old project, right? So it's completely, it has completely changed, right? But it's the basis for it was Motown as well. And the same happened to a couple of these companies that reached out, and these are like, some of those companies are like small companies that not a lot of people have heard of, but some of these were also like serious big companies everybody knows. So that's pretty cool. And that's more or less the last lesson, I think, for today. Is, the cool thing about open source, right, is you put something out there, you just do a git push your code and whatever, right, the code is up there, and then it starts living a life of its own, right, because, this will never really disappear, or well, never really disappear, It's always a thing of the internet, right, put it online once and it will never go away. And the same thing kind of happened with Motown, right, where people adopted it to a certain extent. They looked at the open source project, they looked at the community, and they were like, looks dead to me, right? Not even going to bother filing a bug or whatever. Let's just use it, fix the bugs myself, and get on with my life and not go through the hassle of open source. And there again, that's why the community is so important, to keep this thing alive and to cooperate. But yeah, it was pretty fun also looking back for this presentation to see that, it never really goes away. So that's pretty cool. Yeah, that was my talk. So I guess right on time for lunch. Yeah, get in touch. There's my email, my LinkedIn, and get some more info if you scan the QR code. So.
Thanks, Dennis. As this is open source, should we have done a pull request on the README file and just send an email to motown@ihomer.nl?
Yeah.
Hindsight, easy. Any questions?